Is the US retreating from the global stage? And are they surrendering hegemony as they return home and focus inward rather than trying to project power outward? And are they doing this because they're a failed power who never or no longer has the ability to influence activities on the global stage? That's what we're going to talk about today on Milkshakes, Markets, and Madness. And the reason we're going to talk about it is it's super important. I've said this before, and I'm going to probably continue saying it for a long time. And that is, I think that, for the last 20, 30 years, if you were a Western-based investor or analyst, you could basically look at economic projects on a spreadsheet and see if they penciled out strictly by the numbers. But I don't think that we're in that environment anymore. I think we are now in the environment where global politics, geopolitics, and even domestic politics are going to trump what's going on in markets. And pardon the pun, but I think that is a huge part of it. And I don't necessarily like talking about Donald Trump all the time, but it's impossible not to talk about him if you are involved in geopolitics and if you are involved in capital markets. And as much as we might not like that, some cases we do, in some cases we don't, it's not going to change for a long time, I think. And even when Trump is out of office, whether that's in 18 months or whether that's 3 years or whether it's 10 years from now, whoever comes next, I don't think it's really going to matter then either. And America's role, whether it be inwardly only and focused domestically, or whether it remains on the global stage, will have a huge impact on markets. And I think there's this popular theory that because Trump has touted this America First policy, that it means they only think about the United States. And I think that is a misunderstanding of what the policy means. I think they still very much are going to think about the whole world. And I think they are still very much going to be involved in the whole world. And as such, I think they are still going to throw their weight around on the global stage. It's just that when they do it now, as opposed to doing it for the greater good or the common good or some kind of multilateral, alignment with allies, it is now only going to be done if it's in the interest of the United States. But make no mistake, if it is in the interest of the United States and it's on the far side of the earth, I think the US will be involved. Now, do I like this? Do I think this is the right way to do it? Those of you who have been watching for a long time know that we don't talk about what we think should happen or what's the right thing to happen. What we try to do on this channel is talk about what's actually going to happen, whether we like it or not, because what's actually going to happen is what's going to influence the markets that we allocate to and invest in. So let me bring up, I prepared a couple slides just to kind of help me think through this and talk through it. And again, I think, definitely on social media and definitely on some specific newspapers or specific channels, and certain markets, the America First policy is viewed as a retreat from the global stage. And it's often couched in the terms that the US is a failed empire. They've overextended themselves. They don't really have a choice in this matter. They can no longer compete with China, Russia, and the BRICS. And this is kind of a self-preservation move because they really don't have a choice in the matter. Again, I think that's wrong, but that's a view that's out there. And, I think a lot of it has picked up speed when Trump came to power with kind of his populist, and you could even, call them nationalist policies, and his America First rhetoric. But again, I think that it, to a certain extent, is to misunderstand what America First means. I don't think America First means America only. I think it just means we're still going to be doing what we've always done, but is now focused squarely on the benefit of the United States. Now, we've talked about on this channel, and we've written a lot about it, that Trump has really kind of upended the rules-based order. And the ironic thing is the United States is the one that implemented the rules-based order. And so, as he upends it, I think there's this belief that that will be to the detriment of the United States, since the rules-based order that he is now tearing down was done to benefit the United States. And there's different periodicals, different newspapers, different magazines, but this is not a unique view. This is kind of common out there. Even in some of the defense periodicals are talking about the United States retreating from the global stage, and how they will no longer be using their ability to project force on the other side of the world. And again, I'm not saying that the U.S. is not going to focus at home, and they're not going to focus their attention in the Western Hemisphere. I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think they do want kind of Fortress America, or Fortress North America, or Fortress North and South America, Fortress Western Hemisphere. I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think they don't want to necessarily get bogged down in foreign conflicts or in foreign endeavors that keeps them from benefiting the homeland. And so I understand why that talk is increasing. I think that's actually a big part of the America First policy, but I think it's a big mistake to then automatically assume it means the U.S. will not be involved outside the Western Hemisphere. And then the other view, or an additional view, I guess I would say, is as he continues to remake the world order and gets rid of the rules-based order and does the America First, is that this will, without question, weaken the United States as opposed to strengthen the United States. And again, I'm not going to get into a debate on this particular broadcast whether that's true or that's false, but the point is that's a popular opinion that is out there. And again, part of the reason is that they're doing this is they just do not have the ability to influence events on the global stage anymore. And so I think that what you have to understand is that America First does not mean retreat. It just means a reorganization of priorities. And to assume otherwise, I think you do yourself a detriment. And to automatically assume that the reason they're putting America first and perhaps focusing more attention on the Western Hemisphere is because they aren't going to be involved abroad, and because they don't have a plan, and because they're just shooting from the hip and making it up day by day. I think to assume that, you're doing yourself a big disservice, because while the plan may not be perfect and the plan may not be perfectly executable, and there will no doubt be unintended consequences and mistakes along the way, there is, in my opinion, without question, a plan. And it's being implemented at very high levels. And Trump has put together a team that is pretty much squarely focused on his agenda. Now, of course, every president comes in, fills a cabinet with people who he thinks are going to help him out. But a lot of times over the last 20, 30 years, the State Department, while they were doing what the president wanted, they may have their own agenda or their own way of doing it. And perhaps the Treasury, of course, they're going to do, they're working for the president, but they may have their own ideas on how to do it. What Trump is doing is kind of enforcing everybody to work on the same team. And I should have put a slide in here. I'm going to reference a movie, and I've referenced it before, but there's a movie called The Untouchables from the 1980s. You guys all know I love the 1980s. And if you haven't seen the movie The Untouchables from the 1980s, you should definitely go watch it. But it's about, it basically is about the mob, the feds taking on the mob in Chicago, right? And Al Capone was the big mob boss. And Kevin Costner and Sean Connery are the cops trying to get him. But there's a scene where Robert De Niro plays Al Capone, and they have a big dinner. And he gets up and he talks about all the success they're having. And he has a baseball bat in his hand. He's walking around and he's talking about, baseball and how everybody plays on the same team. And the reason the baseball teams are successful is they think of it as a team and they all work towards the common goal. And then he takes the baseball bat and he smashes one of the guys over the head because that guy wasn't a team player and he wasn't pulling towards a common goal. I'll let you go watch the whole scene because I don't do it justice. But I think there's a little bit of truth to that with Trump here. And again, Doesn't necessarily mean we have to approve of it. Doesn't necessarily mean we have to like it. It doesn't even mean it's the best way to do it. But it's reality. This is what's happening, and this is what's affecting the markets that we're involved in. And I really think that that's what Trump is doing. He is a strong man in the purest sense of the word, right? He is a force of nature, and he is pushing his will forward, and he's putting people in place that will do what he wants. And by and large, the people that he has in place are not only accepting to do it, they want to do it. So I think, again, to assume that it's just a bunch of clowns that have no idea what's going on and they don't have any chance of succeeding, I think that's the wrong way to think about it. Now, I don't think they're a bunch of geniuses who have it all figured out and are definitely going to win. I just think to underestimate them and to assume there's no plan and they're just waking up every morning and willy-nilly making things up as they go, I think that's the wrong way to think about it. But this is the time I'm going to go back and I'm going to pitch our research service, because a lot of the stuff that we talk about on here on the channel every week, we write about it in much greater detail on our Substack. We have a number of different ways that you can follow us. There's a free version, there's a regular version, and there's a premium version. But we really go into a lot more detail on that service than what we have the ability to go into on the channel here. And the way we describe it is it's the intersection of geopolitics, capital markets, and the madness of crowds. So anyway, if you like what we're doing here on the channel and you like listening to us every week, please consider going over to our research site and check out our offering. But one of the things, part of the reason, that we started that service was because all of the stuff that we talk about on this channel, it really does influence capital markets. And you guys have heard me talk about this 100 times, but the reason I keep repeating it is because I think it's maybe the most important thing for people to realize. And that is, at the end of the day, the reason we talk about all of this is because we want you to be able to protect the money you've made and make more money on top of it. And when you're placing your hard-earned money at risk, the most important thing for you to do is be realistic and be objective and understand the risks you're taking when you place that at risk. And the reality is if you're not just going to sit in cash, then you're going to take some risk. That's just, and you could even argue just sitting in cash is taking a risk because of inflation. But the point is you have to put your money somewhere. And despite all the problems that the United States has, and I could talk for days and days and days about all the problems the United States has, take a look at this map and ask yourself where you would, other than the United States, where you would want to put your money if you could not take it out for the next 5 years, where you would put your money. Now, I know some of you are going to say gold. I know some of you are going to say Bitcoin, and that's fine. I think everybody should have those types of assets, right? But I don't think that should be your entire portfolio. And we've been over the reasons that is. But the other assets that you have at play, and even if you did have those assets, where do you want them custodied? Where do you want them to be held? But when you look at this map, where would you want to put your capital for the next 5 years and you couldn't take it out? Would you want to put it in Europe that has a war on their border, who has very little growth, who doesn't have a unified leader, and has, in many ways, doesn't even have a sovereign defense mechanism? If you want to put your money in Europe for 5 years and have to lock it up there, that's your choice. What about Africa? Do you want to put your money in Africa for 5 years and lock it up? Now, again, I understand you probably don't want to put your money anywhere for 5 years and lock it up. But if you had to choose, would you put it in South America for 5 years? Would you put it in Russia for 5 years? Would you put it in China for 5 years? Now, I know some of those may be a little better than others, but when I look at this map, and forget if you're American, forget if you're Russian, forget if you're Chinese, forget if you're South African, just try to be as absolutely brutally neutral as possible. Be objective and say, where do you think the best opportunity lies on this map? And I think when you do that, I think it's really, really hard not to choose the United States. Now, doesn't mean it's impossible. It doesn't mean there's not opportunities other places. But if you have to choose one place, where do you go? And then if you don't think it's the United States, that's fine. But then think about most other people in the world. Where are most other people going to put their money in the world? And one thing that we haven't really talked about on this show, but we will at some point, is we have talked a little bit about offshore tax havens and money centers, places like the Cayman Islands or the Cook Islands or Monte Carlo, some of these offshore places where kind of the rich and famous will house assets, right? Well, the one thing that I think a lot of people don't realize is that for people not in the United States, that are not United States citizens, the United States is by far, and it's not even close, the biggest tax haven in the world. All of the wealthy families outside of the United States are always trying to figure out how to get their money into the United States. Now, will that possibly change in the future? Yeah, it's possible that it will change in the future. But as it is right now, more of the wealthy people in the world want to put their money into the United States than want to leave it in their home countries. And that's, that's just the way it is. We don't have to like that, but that is a current reality. So when you think about this, where do you want to put your money? Now, let's get back to the U.S. on the global stage. Let's think about this. Does America first necessarily mean retreat? Well, let's just take a look and see what has happened since Trump has been president and he's started to implement this America First policy. And let's just look at the evidence to see whether he is retreating from the global stage and whether he is just focused strictly on the United States. And let's pick four different things. I just threw these up. Diplomatic, we'll look at things from a diplomatic perspective, from a military perspective, from an economic perspective, and then some miscellaneous stuff. Well, okay, so from a diplomatic perspective, on the global stage, Trump went and visited MBS in Saudi Arabia. Now, I don't know if anybody watched this on TV or read about it in the papers, but he was not exactly ignored while he was there. I mean, Saudi Arabia rolled out the biggest pomp and circumstance. They kind of outdid Great Britain on this one. I mean, you could tell the people of KSA just absolutely loved Trump. So it's not exactly like, he was seen as a pariah. And, I know over the last couple of years, a lot of people were saying that, Saudi Arabia was going to align with the BRICS and was no longer going to work with the United States. Well, certainly didn't look like it when Trump went and visited there. And I know some people say, well, this is just a picture. Of course, they're going to go shake hands. Well, that's fine. But the same people that are saying that almost did backflips when Putin and Xi got together and shook hands a couple of years ago. And they were all saying, oh, this is a signpost. This shows where the world is headed. So again, try to be as objective as possible. Just look back. Does this look like Trump is being rejected on the global stage? Does it look like he is just retreating to the United States and not wanting to be involved abroad? Or what about the fact that they've already been able to negotiate the release of some political prisoners held in Venezuela? I mean, that's a great thing that, the Biden administration was trying to get done and they didn't get it done. But Trump comes in and 6 months later, they're home. Or what about, as these trade deals have been being worked on, Trump, and Trump needed to meet with the leaders of the UK and the EU. Where did they meet? Did Trump have to fly to Brussels or to Frankfurt to meet with the EU leaders and beg them to do a deal with him? No. The head of the EU went and met Trump at his golf course in Scotland. In other words, they went to Trump. Trump didn't have to go to them. They went to Trump and they went on Trump's terms and they met at Trump's golf course. He didn't want to take time out of his golf trip to go meet with them, but he said, you come, you can come meet me at my golf course and we'll have a nice talk. So, again, I'm not saying that this is necessarily means that Trump is winning everything. I'm just saying it's not like he doesn't have influence and it's not like nobody wants to speak to him. Same thing with Keir Starmer from Great Britain, right? They had to get a trade deal done too. And so they went up to Scotland to see Trump in Scotland. And so, again, I think just being objective, we don't necessarily have to like the way Trump does things. And I think, to use the word diplomatic and Trump in the same sentence is perhaps a little bit of a misnomer. I'm the first to admit that. But my point is the last 6 months, you can't really argue that the United States doesn't have the ability to influence events on a global basis based on what's happened so far. Now, you might argue that going forward, he will no longer be able to do it. And you're welcome to make that argument. But just based on the evidence so far, he's not exactly retreated from the global stage. And he hasn't exactly backed down and just given everything away to the opposition. But then let's look at it from an economic perspective, because a lot of people said, the trade deals were a farce. He's chickening out, the Taco Tuesday Trump, and he's never going to get these trade deals done. Well, if at the beginning of the year someone had said that he's going to have deals with Japan, with the EU, with Great Britain, and that manufacturing is going to be coming back to the United States, a lot of people would have said, no, it's not going to happen. It's a pipe dream. But here we are. Now, the New York Times doesn't exactly love Trump, right? But even the New York Times is saying that, so it's kind of an unprecedented deal that Trump has gotten with Japan. And they're going to invest a lot of money into the United States. Now, again, you might say that this is going to fail. You might say that this is stupid policy. You might say that Trump got whatever. That's all fine. But the bottom line is that a trade deal did get signed, and it is more favorable to the United States than it was a year ago, right? Same thing with the EU. You might say it's not a great deal, and perhaps it's not everything that Trump wanted. But I can tell you the business people in Europe aren't exactly thrilled with it. And von der Leyen wasn't exactly thrilled with it, but they didn't really have a choice. At the end of the day, they had to do business with the United States, and they wanted to do business with the United States. And Trump got the better end of the deal with the EU. Now, is it a perfect deal? Is it guaranteed to work? No, it's not. But again, it's not like that he totally retreated from the global stage because he didn't have any influence. And this is really important, because this is going to affect global markets. Does anybody honestly think that Apple would be investing $100 billion into the United States manufacturing capabilities if Trump wasn't president? Now, again, we can argue whether they're actually going to end up doing this, whether this is a good deal, whether it's a bad deal, how long it will take, what are the terms of it? Totally agree. But again, if Trump wasn't president, would any of this even be happening? And the point is that this is not the U.S. retreating from the global stage. And remember, when these foreign countries are agreeing to new terms with the United States, and they are agreeing to invest money into the United States, or an American company is leaving that foreign country and coming back to the United States, that affects the rest of the world. So that is the U.S. having an impact on a global basis. And then the other thing is, the Treasury actually posted a surplus in June. And when was the last time the U.S. Treasury posted a surplus? Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that this is going to become the norm. I don't think it is going to become the norm. But the point is it never even would have happened if the U.S. was totally retreating, was no longer trying to influence things abroad, and was no longer trying to get favorable trade deals with the rest of the world. And so again, I think, you just take a look at just these four things. I don't think you can argue that the U.S. no longer has the ability to influence things on a global basis. To me, it's pretty obvious they still have the ability. Now, I'm not arguing they have the perfect ability. I'm not arguing that there aren't going to be some unintended consequences. I'm just saying the idea that the U.S. has retreated from the global stage because they no longer have any influence is just provably incorrect. But let's look at it from a military perspective, because military and hegemony often go hand in hand. Does this year, do you think this is a resemblance of a global hegemon that is shirked back into its cave and no longer wants to influence things abroad? No, I mean, they got totally involved in the Israel-Iran war. They've been totally involved in the Syria ongoing military conflicts. Trump has been very involved in the Ukraine-Russia war. He's met with Zelensky, I don't know how many times. He's sent weapons. He's met with he's met with a number of different members of Congress who are either arguing for or against additional military spending in Ukraine. Not only that, but he has basically dictated military spending policy for all of Europe from the United States. Now, how many other countries can dictate to another country how much money to spend on their military? Because Trump is making all of the NATO members spend 5% of their budget on military expenditures. Now, what if China told somebody else they had to spend 5% of their budget on military? Or what if Russia told them that they had to do it? Now, I'm not saying that this is preferable. I know this is the United States being the bully. I don't necessarily like the United States being the bully, but this is reality. So I don't know how anybody can, with a straight face, say the United States no longer has the ability to influence things abroad when they can force an entire continent to change their spending policy towards military. That, to me, just right there alone says the U.S. still has great influence on the global stage. And just recently, I think this just came out in the last couple of days, the United States is now going, Trump is directing the military to take action against Latin American drug cartels. Now, I mentioned a 1980s movie a little bit ago. I think this one was from the 1990s, but there was a movie exactly about this. So and I think that that movie showed things don't always go perfectly, and I wouldn't expect this to go perfectly either. But again, this is not the United States saying, we're only going to focus on the United States. They're saying if something is influencing the United States, no matter where it is, we're going to be involved, right? And then, of course, the news that just came out over the last couple of days that Putin and Trump are going to meet in Alaska about the Ukraine war, right? Now, again, why would Putin go visit Trump at all? If Trump had no influence and Trump was retreating from the global stage and Trump had no ability and the United States had no ability to force project abroad, why would Putin waste his time? And why would Putin come to the United States? Now, they're going to Alaska, so it's not exactly like he's flying to DC, but it is in the United States. And anybody who is out there saying that this is like secretly some kind of 3D chess move on behalf of Putin because there's an ulterior motive and he wants Russia back or he wants Alaska back as part, get real. Now, I don't think that this is necessarily a perfect win for Trump, and I don't know what's going to come out of it. Maybe nothing will come out of it. And maybe Trump ends up, giving away Eastern Ukraine. But the fact that Trump is even talking about giving up Eastern Ukraine to Russia, doesn't that show that the United States does have influence on the global stage? Now, some people say, well, Ukraine won't agree to this. Okay, can Ukraine fight the war without the United States? Of course they can't, right? So again, if Ukraine can't defend itself without the United States, doesn't that mean the United States still has influence on the global stage? So I think these are the types of things you need to think about because these are the things that are going to influence markets going forward. Now, here's just a couple of miscellaneous things, and perhaps they're kind of silly, but even like with the pharmaceutical industry, Trump's getting involved in that, and that has big implications for both Asian and European pharmaceutical industries. Even the vaccine policy, the U.S. foreign aid that goes abroad that was used for vaccines, that's not being renewed. So that's a force multiplier on the global stage. Tulsi Gabbard even said America first should not be misunderstood as America alone. And listen, I think when you're the global hegemon or when you're the leader or when you're the, a polar power, there's that saying, you don't really have friends, you only have interests. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. But the other part of it is you have to remember Trump considers himself a deal maker. He doesn't consider himself a loner. He considers him a deal maker who's friends with everybody. So why would somebody who considers himself a deal maker and who's friends with everybody retreat to his own little cave and just stay home? Of course he's not going to do that. Now, the other thing is, like, can you think of a bigger egomaniac than Donald Trump? I mean, do you really think he's going to retreat from the global stage? You think he doesn't love being on the front page of the news of the Financial Times? You think he doesn't love the BBC covering his every move? You think he doesn't love it when the South China Morning Post, has a picture of him talking about, the trade deal with China? He loves this stuff. Of course he's going to be involved. I mean, anybody who thinks that Trump is going to retreat and not throw his quote unquote weight around is just, they're delusional. Of course he's going to be involved. And then the last thing I put up here is, he just nominated Stephen Moran to the Federal Reserve Board. Now, I don't know if anybody read Stephen Moran's piece from Hudson Bay Capital last year, but if you don't think him being elevated to the Federal Reserve Board has the potential to impact things globally, I would strongly suggest you go read that paper. Now, again, I don't necessarily think that everything written in that paper is going to be implemented, but this is another person that's going to be on the team, potentially on the team, that's moving towards what Trump wants to accomplish. And that very much impacts the rest of the world. And then I made this one its own slide because it goes without saying that this dollar still very much influences the rest of the world. And I'm going to have a lot more to say about stable coins because I don't have time to do it today. But I think that stable coins are perhaps the biggest single potential issue that I've talked about in a long time. And I think it's not so much that it's going to create a lot of demand for treasuries, although I think that might be part of it. But I think it is a big part of extending US dollar hegemony for a very long time. And anybody who has not been paying attention to this in the Genius Act, I think you absolutely have to do it. I don't have time to get into it tonight, but I'll be saying more about this in the weeks and months ahead. But I'm going to wrap up here on this part of it, at least, with just coming back to this. You have to remember this is a relative game. It's not about finding a perfect place to allocate your money. It's not about finding a perfect political environment in which to do it. And it's not about finding a perfect system in which to operate, because it doesn't exist. You have to pick someplace on the map. And at the end of the day, it's a relative game. And I've posted this picture before, and I've talked about it before, but I'm going to continue posting. I'm going to continue talking about it because I think this perfectly personifies the point I'm trying to make. I want to be very clear. I hope that what I've just talked about is not an indication that I think the United States is perfect. I hope it's not an indication that that makes you think that I don't think the United States will make any mistakes and that they won't get hurt. I think they are going to make mistakes. I think they are going to get hurt. I think this is going to be painful. And that's why I put this picture up here. This is a boxing match from, I think it was 1983. It's probably the best boxing match in history. It went 3 rounds. It's Marvin Hagler's on the right and Thomas Hearns is on the left. It's better than any Rocky movie. If you've never seen it, go look it up on YouTube and watch it because it's fantastic. But the reason I post this picture is Hagler, who's on the right, got hit so hard in the first round. You can kind of see it in this picture. His face is all bloody. He got hit really hard above the eye and a huge gash opened up and he was bleeding all over his face. And there was a point in the first round where they thought they might even have to stop the fight because the cut was so bad. Somehow, he makes it to the end of the round, goes back to his corner. His camp, the people in his corner get the blood stopped. And he goes back out there in the second. And then in the third round, he knocks Hagler out. So he ends up winning. And the point is nobody goes into a fight not expecting to get hit. And I expect the United States to get hit. I expect the United States to get hurt. I expect the United States to bleed. But I think it's a relative game. And I think the other countries will get hit as well. I think the other countries will get hurt as well. And I think they will bleed as well. And I think the United States, despite all its problems, still has the ability to throw knockout punches that not everybody else has. And I think that influences global markets, because like I said earlier, I don't think you can just look at a spreadsheet anymore. I think you now have to consider things on a national interest level, a national security level, and a geopolitical strategy level. So, okay, so that's it for that part. I'm going to run over a few, let me see, how do I do this? I'm going to run over a few charts because I know you guys like to look at these charts. Oh, where are we going here? Hold on. I got to find it. Oh, there it is. Okay, hopefully you can see this now. This is a chart of the Dow. Now, you know, we had the big sell-off at the end of last week. And we said last week that that could potentially be the start. We've been waiting for a correction. We've been waiting for probably 2 months now. We've thought we're overdue for a correction. You can see that the Dow has kind of now gone sideways since the last part of June. So it's been about 5 weeks where it's kind of gone sideways. What I wanted to show you down here is we've got a couple different divergences. We've got some divergences between different equity markets, and we've got divergences between price and momentum. So you guys have seen me talk about relative strength and stochastics before, because relative strength just says how is it trading relative to its history and how is it trading from a momentum perspective. So as you know, anytime we get up here in this overbought territory, you know, and a price is high, we're looking for a pullback. And that's what we've seen, you know, in the Dow over the last, you know, month. And as the relative strength come down, then we've seen the stochastics come down as well. Now, while if you're expecting a pullback, ultimately you want to see all three of these coming down. When you see momentum coming down and relative strength starting to tick back up and price starting to tick back up, that is typically not a great sign, because what you typically want to see is them all rising together. If you see a sell-off and you see relative strength start to come down, momentum stop to come down, and then you see a price jump, now you've got price jumping, but the momentum is no longer there, which means it's just a few stocks or it's just a few market participants pushing it higher. Now, that doesn't mean it can't continue higher. It just means think of it like riding a bike up a hill. If you have a lot of momentum and you're going fast, it's not as hard to get up the hill. But if you stop and then you have to start again, it's a lot harder to get going back up that hill. So that's kind of what the Dow is facing now. There's no more momentum. It's trying to go back up that hill, and you can see that it's starting to struggle a little bit. Okay, so now let's look at the same thing on the S&P 500. Similar thing. We see now the difference is if we go back to the Dow Jones, it has not gotten back to its high of where it was a couple weeks yet. The S&P is just kind of right at it, you know, just really flat. So it had the same thing. Relative strength came down. It started to ramp, but momentum is still falling. So it's having, so far, it hasn't been able to get through this high. Now here's the NASDAQ. Now this is a little different. This is where I say we've had a divergence between the indexes. The NASDAQ has been able to get through its high and create a new high, whereas the S&P has only been able to reach the high and the Dow Jones has not been able to reach the high. But again, we see momentum is falling. So relative strength is trying to go back up along with the price. For this to continue higher, somehow they got to get the momentum going higher again, because if this continues to fall, this is going to become an even more and more fragile market. And the market is already extremely concentrated into the Mag 7 and the top 10 names. It's basically the S&P 10 versus the S&P 490. Very, very concentrated, not good breadth at all. Similar thing with semiconductors, and I think I've told you before, I think semiconductors are due for a fairly steep correction. But Microsoft, I wanted to talk to you about Microsoft because I've been talking about Microsoft for a while. And, you know, I've been doing this for 25 years now. I have never seen a chart like this. So, you know, it sold off hard into, you know, the tariff tantrum. And then they had earnings a couple of weeks later and it gapped higher, right? And then literally for the next 3 months, all the way to the next earnings announcements, it's like it was on a stair step. It was like it was just climbing a stair, just every day, almost like every day, just a little higher, just boom, just like clockwork. It would come back down and touch this thing and just boom, 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 boom. Earnings again, gapped higher. But the difference is the last time it gapped higher and just started every day moving higher, 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 higher. This time it gapped higher and immediately came down, and it's been stair stepping lower ever since. And now it sits right at support. So if we break below here, and then we also, if we were to, let me go back to this, let me put Microsoft in here. You will see Microsoft stayed really high on the relative strength for 3 months. It's finally starting to break down, and this is just starting to turn over. So if this picks up speed, if momentum continues to fall and it breaks this support line, that's going to affect the entire market because of the rise of passive and because the influence that the Mag 7 and the big tech stocks have on the overall markets. Here we look at gold. Gold is kind of in no man's land from both a stochastic and a relative strength standpoint. I will notice that it's kind of at a plateau for 3 months now, right? I mean, it's hit this level 1, 2, 3, 4. I think my guess is it'll probably hit this a 5th time this week. I think that might be it. I think it might come down. We'll see. Anyway, I'll show you. I always look at this. This is the commercial short position. You can see the commercial short position. It's not huge, but it's not small. And price has basically gone straight up for the last 12 to 18 months. On silver, you can see the commercial short position actually got a little bit smaller this week. Price is back up at its high. I kind of feel like we got the same thing on silver. Silver, I don't know. We'll see on silver. But I'm a little cautious on gold here. Anyway, that's kind of where we're at. I will say this. Markets, you've heard me say this, but I don't know that we're going to have a crash. I don't think we're going into necessarily a crisis. But what I've been doing this long enough now that there will be a pullback. I've been saying that for all of June and July. Obviously, I don't know the exact timing. I said the same thing in late Q4 after Trump got elected and early Q1, and I didn't end up being right until March and April. But when I was right, I was really right. I could see that same thing happening again here. I don't know that we're necessarily going to turn down on the equity markets this week. Maybe we can kind of go back and test these levels from below. If we look at if we kind of look at the NASDAQ here and we kind of do a technical analysis, maybe it'll just kind of bounce along the underside of this resistance here. But by the end of Q3, we're going to have a pullback. So anyway, be alert, stay sharp, and we'll see you again next week. Bye, guys.